They expected a shuttle, not the galaxy's most powerful human warship. The distress beacon hit every speaker on the bridge at the same time, and the sound it made was something I had never heard before. It was not the clean, structured pulse of a standard emergency signal. It was raw. It was desperate. It cut through the hum of our dormant systems like a scream through silence, and every single person on my bridge froze in the same heartbeat. I was already on my feet before the echo died. "Lucy, isolate that signal," I said. My voice came out steady, but my pulse had jumped to a place it had not been in months. You spend enough years commanding a warship and you develop a sense for trouble. Not the small kind, not the routine kind, the kind that changes things. Lieutenant Lucy Penn was already working, her fingers moving across the communications panel with the precision of someone who had spent 6 years listening to every whisper the galaxy had to offer. She was the best signals officer in the United Earth Navy, and I had fought 3 admirals to get her assigned to my ship. Within seconds, she had the beacon stripped down to its core components and playing back through the main display. The voice that filled the bridge was Valith. I recognized the species immediately. The Valith were one of the oldest civilizations in the known galaxy. They had been building empires when humanity was still figuring out fire. They were proud, composed, and famously unshakable. In 40 years of galactic diplomacy, I had never once heard a Valith sound afraid. This one sounded terrified. The translation software caught up a moment later, converting the alien language into English that scrolled across my tactical display. The message was simple and it was devastating. Relay Station Koth 7, a neutral commerce hub deep in the border region between 3 major alien territories, was under attack. A Dreth hegemony assault fleet had arrived without warning, disabled the station's defenses, and boarded with ground forces. Over 2,000 civilians were trapped inside. Valith, humans, and members of a dozen other species. The Dreth were not negotiating. They were not making demands. They were simply taking the station, and anyone who resisted was being dealt with. The message ended with a single word that the Valith had never, in the entire recorded history of galactic communications, directed at humanity before: help. I let that word hang in the air for 3 full seconds. Then I turned to my executive officer. Commander Catherine Moore was standing at her station with her arms at her sides, and her jaw set in a way that told me she had already processed the situation and was waiting for me to catch up. Catherine was 10 years younger than me, but she had the kind of calm, unbreakable focus that made her the most reliable officer I had ever served with. She did not panic. She did not hesitate. She assessed. She advised, and then she executed. I had told her once that she was the reason I slept at night, and she had told me to stop being dramatic. "How far are we from Koth 7? I asked. 7 hours at standard cruise. 6 at flank speed, she said without checking the navigation console. She had already calculated it. Of course she had. "What do we know about the Dreth force?" Catherine pulled up the tactical summary on the main display. The picture was not encouraging. 14 Dreth warships arranged in a defensive cordon around the station. 2 heavy cruisers, 4 destroyers, and 8 frigates. The heavy cruisers were Ravager-class vessels, each one carrying enough firepower to reduce a small moon to rubble. The destroyer screen was tight and professional. The frigates were running active sensor sweeps in overlapping patterns, creating a detection net that would spot anything larger than a tennis ball trying to approach the station. It was a textbook occupation force, overwhelming, disciplined, and designed to intimidate anyone who might think about interfering. "There is something else," Lucy said from her station. Her voice had that particular tone she used when she had found something important and was deciding how to deliver it. I intercepted a secondary transmission on a diplomatic back-channel. "The Valith government has already contacted the nearest human outpost. They have formally requested assistance." "What kind of assistance?" I asked, though something in my gut already knew the answer. Lucy paused. "Just for a moment. They asked for a shuttle, sir. A single transport shuttle to evacuate the human nationals from the station. They emphasized that they would handle the military response themselves, through proper diplomatic channels with the Galactic Council." A shuttle. 2,000 people trapped on a station surrounded by 14 warships, and the most ancient civilization in the galaxy had asked humanity to send a shuttle. I understood why. Every species in the galaxy operated under the same assumption about humans. We were new. We were small. We had one home system, a handful of colony worlds, and a defense fleet that consisted primarily of frigates and light destroyers suitable for patrol work and pirate suppression. We were, in the polite estimation of the galactic community, a minor species with potential. Clever, certainly. Resourceful, without question. But not a military power. Not a species that could project force beyond its own borders. That was the image we had spent 42 years carefully constructing. I looked around my bridge, at Lucy, who had taught herself to crack Dreth military encryption for fun. At Nathan Cross, my helmsman, who could fly a ship through a needle at relativistic speeds and make it look easy. At Catherine, who was watching me with those steady gray eyes, waiting. They all knew what I was about to say. They had known since the moment that distress beacon first screamed through our speakers. I reached for the ship-wide communication control on my armrest and pressed it. The channel opened with a soft chime that carried to every deck, every compartment, every corridor of the largest warship humanity had ever built. All hands. This is Commander Daniel Hale. Battle stations. I say again, all hands to battle stations. We are moving to engage. The response was immediate. Not because my crew was well trained, though they were. Not because they were disciplined, though they were that too. The response was immediate because every single person aboard this ship had been waiting for this moment since the day they walked up the boarding ramp and saw what they were going to be serving on. The UEN Vanguard was not a frigate. She was not a destroyer. She was not a shuttle. She was a Titan-class dreadnought, the first and only vessel of her kind, and she was the most powerful warship in the known galaxy. 4 kilometers of layered quantum lattice armor wrapped around enough weapon systems to fight a small war by herself. She carried directed energy batteries that could cut through capital ship armor like sunlight through glass. She carried missile banks loaded with warheads that could think, learn, and adapt to enemy countermeasures in real time. She carried a point defense network so dense that our simulations showed her intercepting 97% of all incoming fire simultaneously. And she carried, mounted along her central spine like the backbone of some ancient predator, a weapon that Naval Command had simply named Godhammer, a particle acceleration cannon 300 meters long, capable of delivering more energy in a single discharge than most species use to power their entire capital cities. No alien government knew she existed. No alien sensor had ever detected her. She had been built in secret, inside a hollowed-out asteroid in the frozen darkness of our solar system's outer reaches, assembled piece by piece over 12 years, by engineers who understood that the galaxy was not as safe as it pretended to be. The Valith had asked for a shuttle. They were about to get something very different. I felt the Vanguard's engines engage beneath my feet, a deep vibration that ran through the deck plates and up through my boots and into my bones. Nathan had already plotted the course. Catherine had already begun coordinating the department heads. Lucy was already monitoring every Dreth communication frequency, building a real-time picture of the enemy force that would be waiting for us. 6 hours to Koth 7 at flank speed, Nathan confirmed from the helm. Make it 5, I said. Nathan did not argue. He did not tell me that pushing the engines beyond rated capacity was inadvisable. He simply adjusted the power curve and said, 5 hours, I sat back in my command chair and watched the stars begin to streak past the forward view screen as the Vanguard accelerated to a speed that would have been impossible for any ship the galaxy thought we had. Somewhere ahead of us, 14 Dreth warships were sitting around a captured station, confident in their superiority, waiting for whatever token response the humans might send. Their commander was probably laughing, probably telling his officers that the humans would send a shuttle, maybe a corvette if they were feeling bold, and that it could be swatted aside with a single volley. He did not know what was coming. None of them did. I checked the time on my console and began counting down the hours. 5 hours until we arrived. 5 hours until the galaxy learned a truth that humanity had been hiding for over 4 decades. We were not a minor species. We had never been a minor species. We had simply been patient enough to let the galaxy believe otherwise while we prepared for the day when patience would no longer be enough. That day had arrived. The bridge hummed with quiet, focused energy as every station reported ready. Weapon systems were cycling through diagnostic checks. Shield generators were warming to full capacity. The fighter bays on our dorsal hull were beginning their pre-launch preparations. 64 Valkyrie-class strike fighters being armed and fueled by crews who moved with practiced efficiency. Catherine appeared at my side. She had a data tablet in her hand, but she was not looking at it. She was looking at me. "You know this changes everything," she said. Not a question. A statement. I know. The moment we show ourselves, every species in the galaxy is going to reassess their relationship with humanity. Some of them will be grateful, some of them will be angry, and some of them are going to be very, very afraid. I know that too. She studied my face for a moment longer, then nodded. Whatever she was looking for, she found it. Good. Just making sure you had thought it through. She turned and walked back to her station, and I watched her go with something that might have been gratitude, and might have been affection, and was probably both. Catherine Moore did not waste words, and she did not ask questions she already knew the answers to. She had wanted to hear me say it out loud. She had wanted to confirm that I understood the weight of what we were about to do, and that I had chosen to do it anyway. I had. 42 years ago, humanity had joined the galactic community as the newest and smallest member of a very large and very old neighborhood. We had smiled. We had traded. We had signed treaties and attended summits and been politely patronized by species that had been traveling between stars while we were still building pyramids. And through all of it, behind all of it, we had been building. Building ships, building weapons, building the capability to defend ourselves in a galaxy that, for all its talk of peace and cooperation, was fundamentally ruled by the simple principle that those who could not fight would eventually be consumed by those who could. The Dreth hegemony had taught us that lesson personally. 18 years ago, a Dreth raiding force had attacked a human colony on the edge of our territory, a settlement called New Bristol, home to 600 people. Farmers, engineers, teachers, children. The Dreth had destroyed the settlement in under an hour, and when humanity had protested to the Galactic Council, the Council had expressed regret and issued a formal statement of concern and done absolutely nothing. 600 people, and the galaxy had shrugged. I had been a lieutenant then, young, idealistic, still believing that the systems and institutions of galactic civilization would protect those who played by the rules. The destruction of New Bristol had cured me of that belief permanently. It had cured a lot of people permanently, and it had accelerated a program that had already been quietly running for 2 decades. The Vanguard was the result. Not just a ship, but a promise. A promise that what happened at New Bristol would never happen again, that the next time someone threatened humanity, or the people under our protection, the response would not be a diplomatic protest or a formal statement of concern. The response would be 4 kilometers of warship and every weapon she carried. I checked the countdown on my console. 4 hours and 47 minutes to Koth 7. I reached for my coffee, found the cup empty, and set it back down. It was going to be a long 5 hours. But then again, humanity had been waiting 42 years for this moment. We could wait a little longer. The first hour of our transit passed in focused silence. Every department reported combat readiness in sequence, and I listened to each report with the attention it deserved. When you command a ship with a crew of 3,000, you learn quickly that the difference between victory and disaster often comes down to a single system that nobody thought to check, a single seal that nobody thought to tighten. I did not intend to learn that lesson the hard way. Simon Drake, my chief weapons officer, was the third to report. Simon was a quiet man from a small town in northern England who spoke with a soft accent and chose his words the way a surgeon chooses instruments. I had served with officers who shouted, and officers who whispered, and officers who gave speeches before battle. Simon did none of these things. He simply did his job with a level of competence that made everyone around him feel calmer, and when the time came to fire, he did not miss. All primary batteries at full charge, he said, his voice carrying across the bridge with easy clarity. Secondary batteries online and cycling. Point defense grid is active on standby. Godhammer is cold, but can be brought to firing temperature in 90 seconds on your order. Hold Godhammer in reserve for now, I said. I want the primaries and secondaries ready for immediate engagement. If we need the main gun, I will call for it." Simon nodded. He understood. Godhammer was not a weapon you used casually. It was a weapon you used to make a point. And the point it made was final. Owen Blake, my chief engineer, reported next. Owen was the kind of man who talked to machines the way other people talked to pets, with a mixture of affection, exasperation, and absolute authority. He had been one of the original construction engineers on the Vanguard project, and he knew every conduit, every relay, every structural support in her hull by name and number. When he told me the ship was ready, I believed him the way I believed in gravity. "Reactor output is at 94% and climbing," Owen reported from the engineering deck. "I am holding 6% in reserve in case you decide to do something dramatic. All damage control teams are stationed and equipped. Hull integrity is perfect across all sections." "Thank you, Owen. I appreciate the reserve." "You always do something dramatic, sir. I have learned to plan accordingly." I allowed myself a brief smile at that. He was not wrong. The second hour brought something more useful than readiness reports. Lucy Penn, who had been quietly monitoring Dreth communications since we had received the distress beacon, raised her hand from her station. "Commander, I have intercepted a command-level transmission from the Dreth fleet at Koth 7. It is from their fleet commander to Hegemony Central Command. I have broken their encryption and translated the full message. Put it on the main display." The words appeared on the screen, and I read them carefully. The message was from a Dreth warlord named Vrek Sotan. I knew the name. Every intelligence officer in the United Earth Navy knew the name. Sotan was a career military commander with a reputation for brutality and a record of conquests that stretched across 2 decades. He was the one who had led the assault on New Bristol 18 years ago, though the Galactic Council had never been able to prove it formally. He was the one who had ordered the bombardment that killed those 600 people and then denied any involvement while Dreth propaganda channels celebrated the victory. Sotan's message to his superiors was confident, arrogant even. He reported that Koth 7 was fully secured. Civilian resistance had been minimal. He had deployed ground troops on every level of the station and established a command post in the central operations hub, he noted, with what the translation software interpreted as amusement, that the Valith government had requested human assistance. The next part of his message was the part that made every person on my bridge go still. Sotan reported that his intelligence division had intercepted the Valith request and analyzed the likely human response. Based on known human military capabilities, the assessment was that humanity would send, at most, a single light transport or possibly a small corvette to evacuate their nationals. Sotan recommended allowing the human vessel to approach unmolested. He wanted witnesses. He wanted the humans to see Dreth's strength firsthand, to see the station under hegemony control, to feel the helplessness of being too small and too weak to do anything about it, and to carry that feeling home with them. He called it a teaching moment. I read those 2 words 3 times. A teaching moment. Catherine was at my shoulder. She had read it too. Her face was carefully neutral, but I could see the tension in her jaw. "He is the one who led the attack on New Bristol," she said quietly. "He is the reason we built this ship. I know who he is. What are you going to do?" I looked at the message one more time, then turned to face her directly. "I am going to teach him something." Catherine held my gaze for a moment, then returned to her station without another word. The third hour brought preparation of a different kind. I left the bridge in Catherine's capable hands and walked through the ship. I did this before every major operation, not because I needed to inspect anything. My department heads were thorough and professional, and they would have been insulted by the suggestion that they needed oversight. I walked through the ship because these were my people, and they deserved to see my face before I asked them to fight. I walked through the fighter bays first. 64 Valkyrie-class strike fighters sat in their launch cradles, sleek and angular, each one piloted by a man or woman who had been selected from the top 1% of the Navy's combat pilot program. Their wing commander, Lieutenant Commander Patrick Dunn, met me at the entrance to the bay with a handshake and a grin that suggested he had been hoping for exactly this kind of day. "Commander Hale," Patrick said, "my pilots are ready. Say the word and we will be out there." You will get your word, Patrick. But I need you to understand the priority. The station comes first. 2,000 civilians. If the Dreth try to use the station as a shield or a target, your fighters screen it. I do not care what else is happening. You protect those people. Patrick's grin faded into something more serious and more sincere. Understood, sir. The station comes first. I moved on to the Marine deck. The Vanguard carried a full battalion of Marines, 200 men and women in powered combat armor, who could breach a station, clear it deck by deck, and secure it in under an hour. Their commanding officer was Captain Grace Fielding, a compact, precise woman, who had the remarkable ability to make you feel simultaneously reassured and slightly intimidated. Captain Fielding. Status? Battalion is suited and staged, Commander. We have studied the layout of Koth 7 from the architectural database. I have divided my forces into 4 breach teams, each assigned to a different section of the station. Once you neutralize the Dreth fleet, we can board within minutes. There are civilians from multiple species aboard that station, Captain. Rules of engagement are tight. My Marines know the difference between a hostile and a hostage, sir. We train for this. I nodded. I had seen Grace Fielding's training records. Her Marines were the best boarding force in the Navy, and possibly the best in the galaxy, though nobody outside this ship knew that either. I continued through the ship, through the medical bay, where Dr. Helen Marsh was preparing her staff for casualties that I was determined to make minimal. Through engineering, where Owen Blake was coaxing another 2% out of the reactor with what I suspected was a combination of technical genius and sheer willpower. Through the crew quarters, where off-duty personnel were writing letters, checking equipment, or simply sitting in quiet contemplation. Nobody looked afraid. Some looked tense. Some looked eager. Most looked focused in the way that people look when they have trained for years for a specific purpose, and that purpose has finally arrived. I returned to the bridge with 2 hours remaining on the clock. Catherine had everything under control, as always, but she stepped aside the moment I sat down in my command chair, returning to her own station with the silent efficiency that defined her. Lucy, I said, anything new from the Dreth? Sotan has broadcast a message to the civilian population of the station, Lucy reported. Standard occupation language. Cooperation will be rewarded. Resistance will be met with consequences. He has also begun relocating some of the human merchants to a separate holding area on the station's lower decks. Separating them from the others? It appears so, sir. He may be planning to use them as leverage, or he may simply be organizing his hostages by species. Either way, it confirms that he knows a human response is coming, and he wants to be ready for it. I processed that information and filed it. Sotan was smart. Smart enough to prepare for what he expected to happen. The problem for Sotan was that what he expected to happen and what was actually going to happen were two very different things. The 4th hour was the quiet hour, the hour when everything was ready, and there was nothing left to do but wait. I have always found this to be the hardest hour. Not because of fear. Fear is manageable. You acknowledge it, you set it aside, and you do your job. The hard part of waiting is the thinking, the wondering, the calculating of all the ways things could go wrong and all the things you might have missed. I thought about the people on that station. 2,000 civilians who had woken up that morning expecting an ordinary day of commerce and trade, and had instead found themselves hostages of the most aggressive military power in the galaxy. I thought about the human merchants among them, people who had traveled to Koth 7 to sell goods, make deals, build relationships with alien trading partners. People who had trusted that the galaxy was safe enough for them to do business in. I thought about New Bristol, about 600 names on a memorial wall back on Earth, about the promise that those names represented. Then I stopped thinking and started doing, because the countdown on my console had reached 30 minutes. All stations. Final check, I said. Sound off. The reports came in crisp and clean. Navigation ready. Weapons ready. Defense systems ready. Engineering ready. Communications ready. Fighter bays ready. Marine battalion ready. Medical ready. 3,000 people, all of them prepared. All of them focused. All of them trusting me to lead them into what was about to happen and bring them out the other side. Nathan, I said to my helmsman, When we drop out of faster-than-light travel, I want a full stop at the edge of the system. Do not bring us in close. Not yet. Full stop at system edge. I. Simon. Weapons are to remain on standby until I give the explicit order. We are not firing first. Weapons on standby. I. Lucy. The moment we arrive, I want you broadcasting on every open channel. Standard identification. Ship name, class, registry. I want every vessel in that system to know exactly who and what just arrived. Lucy looked at me with an expression that was half smile and half something fiercer. With pleasure, sir. Catherine. My executive officer turned to face me. Steady, ready. The kind of officer who made commanders look better than they were. If anything happens to me, you take this ship and you finish the job. Nothing is going to happen to you, Daniel. That is not what I asked. She held my gaze. If anything happens to you, I will finish the job. You have my word. Good. I turned back to the forward view screen. The stars were streaking past in long, luminous trails. And somewhere ahead, growing closer with every passing second, was a station full of frightened people and a fleet commanded by a man who thought he knew what humanity was capable of. The countdown reached 0. Drop us out, I said. Nathan Cross pulled back the faster-than-light drive, and the stars snapped from streaks back into points of light, and the Koth system spread out before us in all its unremarkable glory. And then I did something that I had been thinking about for the entire 5-hour transit. Something that I had not told anyone I was planning to do. Something that, in the quiet honesty of my own mind, I had been planning since the moment I read Vrek Sotan's intercepted message, and those 2 words that he had used to describe what he was doing to the people on that station. A teaching moment. I kept every system dark, every light, every sensor, every emission that might tell the Dreth fleet what they were looking at. For exactly 11 seconds, I let the Vanguard sit in the darkness at the edge of the system, invisible and silent, while 14 Dreth warships continued their patrol around a captured station, and had no idea that the largest vessel any of them had ever encountered had just arrived. 11 seconds. Long enough for their passive sensors to register the mass signature. Long enough for the first confused reports to reach Sotan's bridge. Long enough for someone in that fleet to look at their readings and realize that the object sitting at the edge of their system was bigger than anything in their database. Bigger than a Dreth heavy cruiser. Bigger than a Valeth dreadnought. Bigger than anything any species had ever seen a human operate. I let them have those 11 seconds of confusion and uncertainty and dawning comprehension. Then I said, light us up. Every system on the UEN Vanguard came online at once. Active sensors swept outward in a wave that painted every ship in the Dreth fleet with targeting data. Running lights blazed along our hull. 4 kilometers of illuminated warship emerging from the darkness like something out of a nightmare. Our identification beacon began broadcasting on every frequency, in every language the translation database contained. UEN Vanguard. Titan-class dreadnought. United Earth Navy. I watched the tactical display as 14 red markers representing Dreth warships suddenly stopped their patrol patterns. For a beautiful frozen moment, nothing in the system moved. The Dreth fleet simply hung there, processing what they were seeing, trying to reconcile what their sensors were telling them with everything they thought they knew about humanity. Multiple targeting locks detected, Simon reported from the weapons station. His voice was calm, almost bored. The Dreth fleet has raised shields and is training weapons in our direction. Expected, do not respond, not yet. Incoming transmission, Lucy said. It is from the Dreth flagship, the vessel designated Wrath of Sotan. Fleet Commander Vrek Sotan is requesting communication. Put him through. The main display shifted from the tactical overlay to a communication feed, and I got my first look at the being who had destroyed New Bristol and was now holding 2,000 civilians hostage on a captured station. Vrek Sotan was a Dreth. Broad, heavily built, covered in the dark, overlapping scales that characterized his species. He had 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on his face, and all 4 of them were focused on me, with an intensity that told me he was trying very hard to look unimpressed and not entirely succeeding. Behind him, I could see the bridge of his flagship, and I could see the officers at their stations, and I could see the barely controlled alarm in their body language. Sotan spoke. The translation was immediate. Human vessel, you are in restricted space. Identify yourself and state your purpose. I leaned forward slightly in my chair. Not aggressively, just enough to show that I was not leaning back. Fleet Commander Sotan. My name is Commander Daniel Hale, United Earth Navy. I am here in response to a distress signal from Relay Station Koth 7, which you have unlawfully occupied. There are human citizens aboard that station who are being held against their will. I am here to secure their release, along with the release of all other civilian hostages. Sotan's upper eyes narrowed. The lower pair stayed fixed. This is an internal matter of the Dreth hegemony. The Galactic Council has recognized our authority in this sector. Your presence here is unauthorized and provocative. The Galactic Council has not authorized the seizure of a neutral commerce station, or the taking of civilian hostages from multiple sovereign species, including mine. You have 1 hour to withdraw your forces from the station, release all hostages unharmed, and leave the system. Or what? That was the question, was it not? The question that every confrontation between the powerful and the supposedly powerless eventually came down to. Or what? It was a challenge dressed as a question, and it assumed that the answer would be nothing, that the human on the other end of the communication link would bluster and threaten and ultimately back down, because that was what minor species did when faced with real power. I did not answer with words. I simply looked to my left, where Simon Drake was sitting at the weapons console, and gave him a small nod. Godhammer's activation sequence was not subtle. The 300-meter cannon mounted along the Vanguard's spine began its power-up cycle, and even from inside the ship, you could feel it. A deep, subsonic vibration that built from somewhere in the core of the vessel and radiated outward, growing steadily until you could feel it in your teeth. On the exterior of the ship, the cannon's barrel assembly rotated on its central axis, slowly and deliberately, until it was pointed directly at the wrath of Sotan. Sotan saw it. His bridge officers saw it. Their sensor operators, who were undoubtedly feeding them data on the energy buildup inside that weapon, definitely saw it. I watched Sotan's 4 eyes track the movement of the barrel, and I watched something change in his expression. Not fear. Not yet. But the first crack in the armor of his confidence. The communication channel went silent. Not because Sotan had cut it, because he had nothing to say. 9 seconds passed. Then Sotan did what I had expected him to do, what I had planned for, prepared for, and in some quiet corner of my mind, hoped for. He chose pride over survival. He chose to fight rather than retreat. He chose to prove that the Dreth hegemony did not back down, not from anyone, not from a species that he still believed was beneath him despite the evidence currently pointing a 300-meter gun at his ship. All Dreth vessels, Sotan commanded, and his voice carried the hard, brittle edge of a man who had never been challenged and did not know how to do anything but attack. Combat formation, destroy the human ship. The channel cut out. On my tactical display, 14 red markers began to move, spreading from their cordon around the station into an attack formation, aimed directly at us. I took a single breath. Let it out. All batteries, I said, and my voice filled every deck of the most powerful warship in the galaxy. Weapons free. Protect the station, and show them what we are. The Vanguard opened fire, and the Battle of Koth 7 began. The first thing you need to understand about ship-to-ship combat at this scale is that it does not feel the way most people imagine. There are no dramatic explosions rocking the bridge back and forth. There is no fire. There is no smoke. What there is, instead, is data. An overwhelming, constant flood of data pouring across every display on every station, painting a picture of destruction that is abstract and precise and, in its own terrible way, beautiful. The Dreth opened with a coordinated missile salvo. Every ship in their fleet fired simultaneously, and 312 warheads streaked toward us across the void. They were fast. They were smart. They carried enough combined yield to crack a small planet's crust, and they hit our point defense grid like rain hitting a window. 312 incoming warheads, Simon reported. Point defense engaging. The Vanguard's defensive network was a masterpiece of engineering that had taken 6 years and the combined expertise of Earth's best weapons designers to create. It consisted of overlapping layers of automated turrets, each one tracking independently, each one calculating firing solutions thousands of times per second, each one communicating with every other turret in the network to ensure that no two systems targeted the same threat. The warheads began disappearing from my tactical display, not in groups, not in waves, individually. One by one, with mechanical precision, each missile was identified, tracked, targeted, and destroyed before it could come within 500 kilometers of our hull. It took 3.8 seconds. Intercept complete, Simon said. All incoming warheads neutralized. Intercept rate, 100%. I heard someone on the bridge exhale. I was not sure who. It might have been me. Primary batteries. Target their nearest destroyer. Fire. The Vanguard's primary energy batteries discharged, and 2 beams of concentrated energy crossed the distance between us and the nearest Dreth destroyer in less than a heartbeat. The beams struck the destroyer's shield array, overwhelmed it in a fraction of a second, continued through the ship's hull armor, and exited through the far side. The vessel did not explode dramatically. It simply came apart. The structural integrity failed catastrophically and simultaneously across every major support member, and what had been a functional warship became an expanding cloud of debris and gas in the time it took me to blink twice. The second destroyer tried to break formation. Its captain must have realized, in those first terrible seconds, that staying in formation meant dying in formation. The ship banked hard to port and began accelerating away from the engagement zone. Simon, I said, tracking. The secondary batteries fired. The second destroyer joined the first. 2 ships, 12 seconds. The Dreth fleet had lost 2 vessels in the time it would take a normal person to tie their shoes. On my tactical display, I could see the remaining 12 ships reacting. Some were accelerating, some were trying to regroup, some were simply drifting, their crews presumably paralyzed by the speed and totality of what had just happened. For a species that had spent decades believing it was the dominant military power in the region, watching 2 of their warships vanish in seconds must have been profoundly disorienting. Sotan, however, was not paralyzed. Whatever else I thought of the man, he was a fighter, and fighters adapted. Within 30 seconds of losing his first 2 destroyers, he had reorganized his remaining fleet into 3 distinct groups. The first group, consisting of his flagship and 3 frigates, pulled back to a defensive position. The second group, 2 destroyers and 2 frigates, swung wide to our port side, attempting a flanking maneuver. The third group, the remaining 4 frigates, did something that I had anticipated but had hoped he would not try. They accelerated directly toward Koth 7. He was going for the station. If he could not beat us ship to ship, he would threaten the civilians, force me to choose between pressing my advantage and protecting 2,000 lives. Patrick, I said into the tactical channel. The station. Now. Already moving, Commander. The Vanguard's dorsal launch bays opened, and 64 Valkyrie fighters streaked out into the void, in a formation so tight and so fast that they looked like a single entity, rather than 64 separate craft. Patrick Dunn had his pilots at the station in under 2 minutes, forming a defensive screen between the approaching Dreth frigates and the helpless civilians inside. The Dreth frigates opened fire on the fighters. It was a mistake. The Valkyries were designed for exactly this kind of engagement. They were small, fast, heavily armed for their size, and piloted by men and women who had logged more simulation hours than most alien pilots logged in their entire careers. The 4 frigates found themselves engaged by a swarm of fighters that seemed to be everywhere at once, darting between their weapons fire, exploiting their blind spots, and hammering their shields with precision strikes that targeted the same structural points again and again. 2 of the 4 frigates lost their shields within the first minute. Patrick's pilots did not destroy them. They disabled them. Surgical strikes to their engine assemblies and weapons arrays that left the ships drifting and powerless but intact. It was a display of skill and restraint that was, in its own way, more impressive than simple destruction. Anyone can destroy. Precision requires mastery. That left the flanking group to deal with. The 4 ships on our port side opened fire simultaneously. Concentrated plasma bolts struck the Vanguard's port shields. And for the first time in the engagement, I felt the ship shudder. Not violently, not dangerously, but enough to remind me that the Vanguard, for all her power, was not invincible. She was still a ship. She still had a crew. And the people firing at her were still trying to kill every single one of us. Damage report, Catherine called out. Minor scoring on the port armor, decks 12 through 14. Owen Blake reported from engineering. 1-point defense turret on the port quarter is offline. No casualties. Shields holding at 89%. Minor damage. Cosmetic, really. But it was a reminder, and I let it serve as one. Simon. The flanking group. All of them. Simon Drake turned to his console with the focused calm of a man who had found his purpose in life and was fulfilling it. The secondary batteries rotated to port, tracking all 4 targets simultaneously. He fired. 31 seconds later, the flanking group ceased to exist. That left 6 Dreth ships. Sotan's flagship and his 3 escort frigates in their defensive cluster, plus the 2 disabled frigates drifting near the station. 6 ships out of 14. In under 4 minutes of engagement, the Dreth assault fleet had been reduced by more than half. I could have ended it there. I could have called for surrender and given Sotan a chance to recognize the reality of his situation. But I looked at my tactical display and I saw his flagship, the Wrath of Sotan, and I remembered New Bristol and 600 names on a wall, and I decided that Vrek Sotan needed to understand his situation more clearly before I offered him a way out. Lucy, open a channel to the Dreth flagship. Channel open. Fleet Commander Sotan, you have lost 8 warships in 4 minutes. Your flanking force has been eliminated. Your assault on the station has been stopped. You are outgunned, outmatched, and out of options. I am offering you one final opportunity to stand down. Withdraw your remaining vessels and surrender yourself to face a Galactic Council tribunal for your actions here today. This is not a negotiation. This is a courtesy. The channel was silent for a long time. I counted the seconds. 15, 20, 25. Then Sotan's face appeared on my display again, and this time there was no pretense of composure. His 4 eyes were wide and blazing with a fury that went beyond military calculation into something primal and desperate. He was a predator who had always been the biggest thing in the room, and for the first time in his life, he was not. He did not respond with words. He responded by ordering his flagship to attack. The Wrath of Sotan surged forward, engines at maximum, every weapon system firing. The 3 escort frigates came with him, pouring fire at us in a final, desperate charge. It was brave. It was reckless. It was the act of a man who would rather die fighting than accept defeat. I watched him come. I watched the plasma bolts and missiles streak across the void toward us. I watched the point defense grid calmly erase each incoming threat from existence. Then I said, Simon, Godhammer. Simon Drake's hand moved across his console. Deep inside the Vanguard, 300 meters of particle acceleration cannon surged to full power. The vibration that ran through the ship was unlike anything else. It was not a rumble or a hum. It was a single, pure note of barely contained energy, like the ship itself was holding its breath. Godhammer charged and locked, Simon said. Target, Wrath of Sotan. Fire. The cannon discharged, and for an instant that lasted no time at all and lasted forever, a beam of energy brighter than a star crossed the space between the Vanguard and Sotan's flagship. It struck the Wrath of Sotan dead center. It went through the forward shields without slowing. It went through the bow armor. It went through the bridge. It went through the reactor housing. It went through the engineering section. It went through the aft hull and continued out the other side and into empty space beyond. The Wrath of Sotan broke apart. Not in an explosion. In a silence, the ship simply ceased to hold together. It fractured along the line that Godhammer had drawn through it, splitting first in half, then in quarters, and then into fragments that tumbled away into the void, glowing with residual heat. The 3 escort frigates stopped firing. Their engines went dark. their weapons powered down. On every frequency, on every channel, the same signal began broadcasting from each ship. Surrender. I leaned back in my command chair and let out a breath that I had not realized I was holding. On the tactical display, the remaining Dreth vessels drifted in silence. Their crews alive, their ships intact, their fight finished. The Battle of Koth 7 was over. It had lasted 14 minutes and 38 seconds. Around me, the bridge was quiet. Not the silence of shock, though there was some of that. Not the silence of exhaustion, though there was some of that too. It was the silence of people who had just done something that they knew would be remembered, and who were taking a moment to understand the weight of it before they moved on to what came next. Catherine was the first to speak. All stations, report status and casualties. The reports came in one by one. Minor hull damage on 3 decks. 2-point defense turrets requiring repair. 7 crew members treated for minor injuries sustained during the engagement. All returned to duty. 0 fatalities. We had fought 14 warships and suffered 0 fatalities. Grace, I said into the Marine channel, the station is yours. Begin boarding operations. Secure all hostages. Medical teams stand by to assist. Acknowledged, Commander. Breach teams launching now. I watched on the tactical display as 4 Marine shuttles departed from the Vanguard's ventral bays and streaked toward Koth 7. Grace Fielding's battalion was precise and fast. They breached the station at 4 points simultaneously, moving through the corridors in coordinated teams that swept each section with ruthless efficiency. The Dreth ground troops on the station did not resist. Whatever fight they might have had in them had evaporated the moment they watched their fleet get dismantled in 14 minutes. They surrendered in groups, laying down weapons and stepping back from the hostages they had been guarding. Grace's Marines secured each group, restrained them, and moved on. It took 47 minutes to clear the entire station. 2,114 civilians were freed. Not a single hostage was harmed during the boarding operation. I received the final report from Grace directly. Station secured, Commander. All hostages accounted for. We found the human merchants he had separated. 43 individuals. They are shaken but uninjured. The Dreth ground commander asked me who we were. What did you tell him? I told him we were what they sent for. The hours that followed the battle were almost more challenging than the battle itself. The silence of combat was replaced by a storm of communications that made the original distress beacon seem like a whisper. The Valith were the first to respond. A priority transmission from the Valith Compact's central government, delivered by a diplomatic official whose title translated roughly as Speaker of External Affairs. The message was formal, measured, and carefully worded in the way that only a civilization with 10,000 years of diplomatic practice could manage. It expressed profound gratitude for the rescue of their citizens and the liberation of Koth 7. It also contained a question, phrased with exquisite politeness, that I could tell was the real reason they had contacted us so quickly. They wanted to know about the ship. More specifically, they wanted to know how a species that they had categorized as a minor spacefaring civilization for the past 4 decades had produced a warship that could single-handedly defeat an entire Dreth assault fleet, without taking significant damage. They did not ask this directly. Of course, the Valith were far too diplomatic for that. They framed it as an inquiry about the previously unregistered vessel class that had responded to their distress call and expressed a desire to update their records accordingly. I forwarded the message to Earth without responding. That conversation was above my rank. The Orith Confederacy was next. The Orith were a trade-focused civilization that had maintained strict neutrality in every conflict for the past 3 centuries. Their message was shorter and considerably less diplomatic. They wanted to know if the Vanguard was available for hire. I did not forward that one. I deleted it. The Myralan Assembly, the Kethrin Republic, the Sorvath Collective, and half a dozen other species and governments sent messages within the first 3 hours. Some were congratulatory. Some were cautiously neutral. Some were openly suspicious. All of them, without exception, asked the same question in different ways. What else are the humans hiding? The answer to that question was not mine to give. It belonged to the admirals and the diplomats and the politicians back on Earth, who were, I had no doubt, having the most intense series of meetings in the history of human governance. The Vanguard's existence was no longer a secret. Sensor data from the battle was already propagating through every information network in the galaxy. Every species with the technology to analyze that data was doing so right now, and every conclusion they reached would be the same. Humanity was not what they thought it was. Humanity had never been what they thought it was. I received a priority communication from Earth 6 hours after the battle. It was from Admiral Margaret Shaw, the officer who had overseen the Vanguard program from its inception. Margaret Shaw was a small woman with silver hair and a voice that could freeze water at 20 paces. She had spent her career in the shadows, building weapons that the galaxy did not know existed, recruiting officers who could be trusted with secrets that would reshape interstellar politics. She had personally selected me for this command. She had personally approved every member of my crew. "Commander Hale," she said, and even through a faster-than-light communication relay spanning dozens of light years, her voice carried its usual combination of authority and precision. "I have reviewed the battle data from Koth 7. Your performance was exemplary." "Thank you, Admiral. The diplomatic situation is developing rapidly. Every major power in the galaxy has requested an emergency session of the Galactic Council. The Dreth hegemony has issued a formal protest, claiming that our use of an undisclosed military asset constitutes a treaty violation. The Valith Compact has countered by citing the hegemony's unprovoked attack on a neutral station as the actual violation. The Council is expected to convene within 48 hours. What are my orders? Remain at Koth 7. Provide humanitarian assistance to the station. Cooperate with any legitimate Galactic Council inquiry. And Daniel." "Yes, Admiral? Do not apologize for anything. Not the ship, not the battle, not the secrecy. When they ask why we built the Vanguard, tell them the truth." "Which truth would that be, Admiral?" "The one about New Bristol." The connection ended. I sat in my command chair for a long time after that, thinking about truths and secrets and the distance between them. I did not sleep that night. Instead, I walked the ship again, not to inspect, not to prepare, just to walk. The Vanguard was quiet in the way that ships are quiet after battle, a hushed, contemplative stillness that had nothing to do with the absence of noise and everything to do with the presence of reflection. I ended up on the observation deck, a wide, transparent section on the upper hull that provided an unobstructed view of the surrounding space. Koth 7 was visible from here, a slowly rotating structure of metal and light that looked fragile and precious against the backdrop of stars. Beyond it, the debris field from the battle glittered like scattered diamonds, the remains of ships that had come here to conquer and had found something unexpected instead. Catherine found me there. She stood beside me without speaking for several minutes, looking out at the same view. "You are thinking about New Bristol," she said eventually. "I am thinking about a lot of things. The galaxy is going to change because of what we did today. It was going to change eventually. The Vanguard was never going to stay secret forever. We built her to be used, not to be hidden. Some species are going to be afraid of us now. Some species should have been afraid of us a long time ago. Fear is not the goal, Catherine. Respect is, and respect requires the understanding that we can defend what is ours and protect those who need protection." She considered that for a moment. "Diplomacy without strength is just begging with better grammar. Is that how you plan to phrase it for the Galactic Council?" I almost smiled. "I might clean it up a little. Do not clean it up too much. Sometimes the blunt version is the one that lands." She left me alone after that, and I stood on the observation deck and watched the stars, and thought about the 42 years that had led to this moment. Every treaty signed with a polite smile, every diplomatic function attended with humble deference, every intelligence briefing where we cataloged the capabilities of species that dismissed us as too new and too small to matter, every engineer who worked in secret on a project that the galaxy could never know about, every sacrifice made in silence, every insult absorbed without response. All of it had been building to this. Not to war, not to conquest, to the simple, immovable fact that humanity could not be ignored anymore. The next morning, as I was reviewing the latest round of diplomatic communications on the bridge, Lucy reported an incoming transmission from the Dreth prisoners we were holding in our brig. Specifically, from one prisoner, Vrek Sotan. He had survived. His flagship had been destroyed, but emergency protocols had ejected his bridge section before the final collapse. and Grace's Marines had recovered him from the debris. He had been treated by Dr. Drav Marsh for minor injuries and was being held in our most secure detention facility. "He is requesting to speak with you, Commander," Lucy said. "He says it is a personal matter." I considered refusing. I had no obligation to speak with him, and no particular desire to do so. But something in me, some instinct that I had learned to trust over years of command, told me that this conversation needed to happen. Have him brought to the briefing room. Under guard. 20 minutes later, I sat across a table from the man who had destroyed New Bristol. He was smaller than he had appeared on the view screen. The scales that covered his body were dull and scratched from the debris of his destroyed ship. His 4 eyes, which had blazed with fury during our last communication, were quiet now, not defeated, not broken, just quiet. The quiet of a man who was reassessing everything he thought he knew about the universe. 2 of my Marines stood by the door. They were not necessary. Sotan was restrained and unarmed, and in the middle of the most heavily defended warship in the galaxy. But protocol was protocol. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Sotan studied me. I studied him. 2 commanders, separated by a table and by everything that had happened between our species over the past 18 years. Finally, Sotan spoke. The translation came through the room's speakers a moment after his own deep, graveled voice. "I have commanded fleets for 26 years. I have fought in 37 engagements against 11 different species. I have never been defeated. You have now." "Yes." He paused. His lower eyes closed briefly, then opened again. "I underestimated you. Not just today. For years. We all did. Every species in the galaxy looked at humanity and saw what you wanted us to see. A small civilization, clever but harmless. We believed it because it was comfortable to believe, and because you gave us no reason to believe otherwise. We gave you one reason," I said. "New Bristol." Something shifted in Sotan's expression. Recognition, perhaps, or the closest thing to it that a Dreth face could produce. "You built this ship because of New Bristol," he said. It was not a question. "We built this ship because the galaxy taught us that no one would protect us but ourselves. You were the teacher. Congratulations." Sotan absorbed that in silence. Then he asked a question. Just one. And it was the question that I had known, from the moment I had agreed to this meeting, that he would ask. "How many ships like this do you have?" I looked at him across the table. I looked at this man who had ordered the destruction of a human colony and slept well that night, who had seized a neutral station and taken 2,000 hostages and called it a teaching moment, who had attacked my ship with everything he had and discovered that everything he had was not even close to enough. I held his gaze, and I let the silence stretch until it became its own kind of answer. Then I smiled, not broadly, not with triumph or cruelty, just a small, quiet smile that said everything and nothing at the same time. Enough. Sotan stared at me. He searched my face for a tell, for a bluff, for any crack in the mask that might reveal the truth behind that single word. He found nothing, because it was not a mask, and it was not a bluff. He did not ask again. I had him return to his cell. He went quietly, and as the door closed behind him, I noticed that his posture had changed. Not broken, not defeated, but recalibrated. He had walked into that room with the assumption that the Vanguard was an anomaly, a single ship, a one-time surprise that could be accounted for and eventually overcome. He walked out of that room not knowing, and that uncertainty, I knew, would keep him up at night far more effectively than any weapon in our arsenal. The Galactic Council convened 3 days later. I attended via holographic link from the Vanguard's briefing room, alongside Catherine and a diplomatic attaché named Philip Garrett, who had been rushed to our position on the fastest transport Earth could muster. Philip was young, sharp, and completely unintimidated by the prospect of addressing the most powerful political body in the galaxy. I liked him immediately. The council session was, to use Philip's word, energetic. The Dreth ambassador demanded sanctions against Earth for concealing a military capability in violation of the Transparency Accords. The Valith ambassador pointed out that the Transparency Accords had been written by the Dreth themselves, specifically to prevent smaller species from developing defensive capabilities, and that perhaps the hegemony should focus less on what humanity had built, and more on why they had felt the need to build it. The Oreth representative suggested that everyone calm down. Nobody calmed down. I was asked to testify. I kept it simple. I described the distress signal. I described the Dreth occupation of the station. I described the hostages, including 43 human citizens. I described my offer of a peaceful resolution, which Sotan had rejected. I described the engagement, briefly and without embellishment. I described the rescue of 2,114 civilians. Then the council chair, a Valith elder whose name I could not pronounce correctly, asked me the question that the entire galaxy had been asking since the battle. Commander Hale, why did humanity conceal the existence of this vessel from the galactic community? I thought about Admiral Shaw's instruction. Tell them the truth, the one about New Bristol. 18 years ago, I said, a Dreth raiding force attacked a human colony called New Bristol. 600 people were killed, men, women, and children. When humanity brought this matter to the Galactic Council, the Council expressed regret and took no action. The message that humanity received that day was clear. In this galaxy, the ability to protect yourself is the only protection that matters. We acted on that message. We built the means to ensure that what happened at New Bristol could never happen again. The chamber was silent. We did not build the Vanguard to threaten anyone. We did not build it to conquer. We built it because we learned, from painful experience, that diplomacy without the capacity for self-defense is meaningless. We would have preferred a galaxy where such a ship was unnecessary. We were not given that galaxy, so we built the ship. I stopped talking. The silence that followed lasted long enough for me to wonder if the communication link had dropped. Then the Valith elder spoke again. The council will take the testimony of the human delegation under advisement. That was it. No judgment, no resolution. The council would deliberate and discuss and negotiate, and eventually produce a statement that said very little and changed nothing. That was how galactic politics worked. Slowly, carefully, and almost always too late to matter. But something had changed. Not in the council's procedures or its resolutions. In the faces. I watched the ambassadors and representatives as the session ended, and I saw something in their expressions that had not been there before. Some of them looked wary. Some looked thoughtful. A surprising number looked something that I could only describe as relieved, as if they had been waiting for someone to push back against the Dreth for a very long time, and had simply lacked the means or the courage to do it themselves. The Valith ambassador caught my eye as the holographic feeds were shutting down. She inclined her head in a gesture that, in Valith culture, signified deep and personal respect. I returned the gesture, and the feed closed. Later that evening, I sat in my quarters aboard the Vanguard and wrote a report to Admiral Shaw. I described the council session. I described the reactions of the various species representatives. I described the Dreth ambassador's fury, and the Valith ambassador's quiet support, and the general atmosphere of uncertainty and recalculation that had pervaded the chamber. Then I added a personal note at the end. The galaxy expected a shuttle. We sent the Vanguard, for 42 years. We smiled and traded and signed treaties, and let every species in the known universe believe that we were small and harmless, and not worth worrying about. That era is over, not because we wanted it to end, but because a station full of innocent people needed help, and we were the only ones willing and able to provide it. They know about us now. They know what we can build. They know what we are willing to do. Some of them are afraid. Some of them are angry. But for the first time in 4 decades, when humanity speaks, the galaxy does not just hear us. It listens. I sent the report and closed my terminal. Through the window of my quarters, I could see Koth 7, still slowly rotating, its lights restored, its population safe. Beyond it, the stars stretched out in every direction, vast and indifferent, and full of civilizations that were, at this very moment, looking at those same stars and wondering what humanity would do next. I did not know the answer to that question. Nobody did. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever came next, we would face it as we had faced everything else. Not with fear, not with aggression, with patience, with preparation, and with the unshakable understanding that the universe respects those who can stand on their own feet. and protect those who cannot. We had been underestimated for 42 years. That was over now, and I suspected, as I turned off the light and closed my eyes for the first night of sleep I would get since the distress beacon had first screamed across my bridge, that the galaxy was going to find the real version of humanity far more interesting than the fiction we had allowed them to believe. The Vanguard hummed around me, steady and strong, carrying 3,000 souls through the darkness between the stars. My ship, my crew, my responsibility and my privilege. Tomorrow there would be more questions, more diplomacy, more recalculation by species who were still trying to understand what had changed and what it meant. But tonight, 2,000 people were safe who would not have been safe without us. Tonight, a warlord who had believed he could act without consequence was sitting in a cell, contemplating a future he had not planned for. Tonight, the memorial wall on Earth where 600 names from New Bristol were carved in stone stood a little straighter, if a wall could do such a thing, because those names had finally, after 18 years, received the only answer that the universe truly understands. Not revenge, not conquest, capability. Demonstrated, undeniable, and absolute. I slept well that night.